Hi there, and welcome to Maritime Paranormal Chat, where we examine and share stories of the paranormal, the unexplained, and the just plain weird. We're podcasting from beautiful Prince Edward Island, Canada, which is on the East Coast. I always feel the need to say that because a lot of people in North America still have no idea where we are or have ever even heard of Prince Edward Island. Nonetheless, we're famous for our lobster suppers, potatoes, beaches, and of course, our most famous resident of all, Anne of Green Gables. Good day to you. My name is Raven, and this is the official first episode of our show. Thank you very much for joining us today and being part of our history in the making. Today, our stories are going to take us to Amherst, Nova Scotia, which was the scene of one of Canada's most famous hauntings. We're also going to hear about mysterious lights in Quispamsis, New Brunswick. I'll review a horror movie called The Boy, and we'll share stories about dolls that move. Oh, and by the way, what do you think would be the creepiest job that you could possibly have? Well, we're going to find out as one university took a survey recently, and that was one of the questions that was asked. Now, the results may just surprise you. Also, our very own creepy Laroo will keep us up to date on what's new on the internet in regards to the paranormal, the weird, or just plain creepy. So we have a lot to cover on this episode, so whatever you do, don't go away. But first, I hope you guys are all doing well. It's good to see that businesses are starting to reopen here locally on Prince Edward Island, and globally for that matter, as we're starting to get somewhat of a sense of normalcy again. And locally, the best piece of news that I've heard this week is that Michael's Pizzeria has reopened in Summerside. Mind you, it's for takeout orders only. Nonetheless, a big shout out to them. And for anybody who hasn't actually tried Michael's Pizza in Summerside, you're really missing out, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion. It's the best pizza in Summerside and all of Prince Edward Island, as far as that goes. Pizza, as you'll find, is my all-time favorite food, and I'm very critical about my pizza, so if I ever recommend a pizza place or a brand of pizza, then there's definitely a good reason for that. Now, I don't know about you guys, but all this lockdown and social distancing is really starting to get annoying. I can't wait until this pandemic comes to an end so we can go about our normal daily routine again. I feel a bit of a rant coming on, so please just bear with me. I know I speak for a lot of other people when I say that I miss the days of freely going into a grocery store without having to stand in a lineup. I also miss having more than just a handful of people in the stores at any given time. I miss not having to worry about staying 6 feet away from everyone when I'm in a store, or anywhere else for that matter. One thing I do have to say about the pandemic and waiting in lines and whatnot is that the other day it actually made me feel a little nostalgic. I was waiting in the lineup to get into Walmart, usually not more than a couple of minutes. Never takes very long, but it just reminded me of growing up in Summerside back in the 1980s, standing in line waiting to get into the movies at the Capitol Twin Theaters on Central Street without the social distancing. Now, anybody who grew up in Summerside back in the 1980s knows exactly what I'm talking about. After the movies, of course, we'd head over to Michael's Pizza, which was right next door. So having said all that, as North America and the rest of the world are cautiously reopening their business doors to customers, keep in mind that maintaining a safe social distance between each other is still the order of the day. And speaking of social distancing, as annoying as it is, some countries are actually making the best out of a bad situation. I was reading something a couple of days ago online where a lot of places in North America and all over the world are actually getting really creative in the ways they enforce social distancing. Now, some methods you'll find may be a little creepy. I think some of them would actually be somewhat enjoyable, and some of the other ones I think would be just plain amusing, at least to watch anyways. Unless you're really half in the bag, then you're going to enjoy it either way. For example, at a place called the Café Livres in Essen, Germany, and a place called The Inn at Little Washington in Virginia, they're enforcing social distancing by putting well-dressed mannequins into empty seats. Now, just imagine going to a bar or a restaurant and having your drink or meal next to a dummy. And I don't mean a bad date that you happen to be on at the time, but I mean an actual mannequin that's dressed probably better than most people there and looks as human as humanly possible. Maybe I watch too many movies, but to me this is eerily creepy, creepily reminiscent of the Twilight Zone's The After Hours, if you remember that. Enjoy your meal or drink, Marcia. To dissuade, you'll have to watch the episode to get that, by the way. And to dissuade people from gathering at the bar, one Vienna pub actually placed a mannequin on top of the bar, in addition to strategically placing other mannequins sitting around the tables and in standing positions throughout their pub. No, nothing creepy about that. At Five Dock Dining in New South Wales, Australia, they're using cardboard cutouts in the shape of humans, and they're putting them in place to make diners feel more comfortable. Now, how that's possible, I'll never know, but they even set up special speakers in different parts of the restaurant just to go the extra mile for background noise, to give the illusion that the bar is busier than it actually is. Now, the owner, Frank Angeletta, says the cutouts and background noise are a little creepy when you first walk in. No kidding. But once you're sitting down, he says it's actually quite enjoyable. Now, this is where we need to remember that we all have different definitions of the term enjoyable. In South Carolina, they're doing something a little different, something a little more entertaining, amusing to watch, I would say. The place is called Open Hearth, and they're actually using blow-up dolls instead of mannequins. Now, before your minds get too far into the gutter, these are actually the G-rated kind of inflatable dolls, not the kind that, never mind. A little less on the creepy side and a little more on the enjoyable side. There's a place in Bangkok where many restaurants are using cardboard cartoon dragons, again placing them strategically at tables and at the bar. More specifically, customers at a place called the Maison Saigon restaurant actually get to sit next to stuffed panda bears to remind them of social distancing. Now that I think would be kind of nice, especially if you had kids with you. In Germany, many restaurants are offering each party of guests shelter. I do mean that literally, under its own, what they call personal-sized greenhouses. This is an innovation that is both romantic and practical, not just during the pandemic, but I think it also be good during bad weather, as these are actually little green enclosed houses, see-through, made of plexiglass, just big enough for a table and room for two to sit across from each other, situated outside of the restaurant. I think that'd be kind of cool to eat there, especially on a rainy day. The Shabu Shabu restaurant in Bangkok took a no-frills approach to ensure social distancing in their restaurant. They weren't very creative, though, as they just got some cheap-looking pipes that looked like they just basically pulled them off the walls and tied them together with some sheets of clear plastic. Unlike a place called the Goga Cafe in Milan, Italy, who went one step further by installing plexiglass barriers, not only between the tables, but also between dining companions. So it's basically like you're visiting somebody in prison, as you can't touch the person in front of you unless you stand up and literally reach over the plexiglass separating you. Some places got just downright ridiculous. For example, there's a place called Ocean City in Maryland where there's a seaside restaurant called Fishtails, who have, get this, 10 bumper tables to use when dining in. Customers will get their own actual gigantic inner tube tables with wheels attached that you actually have to step into and strap them on with overalls. Yes, you wear them, so you can roll around the establishment and socialize, yet always keeping a safe distance of 6 feet from each other. Yes, each person would be wearing a giant inner tube, customized to be used as a table. And probably the most amusing to watch is at a place called Cafe Roth in Germany, where guests have to wear neon-colored pool noodle hats designed to keep social distancing. Yes, special hats made with multicolored neon pool noodles that look like giant propellers, which is very reminiscent of Inspector Gadget. So having said all that, just remember that as bad as social distancing and being in lockdown has been, it could definitely always be worse. Don't go away, because coming up we're going to Quispamsis, New Brunswick to find out about some mysterious lights. But right now I just want to give a shout out to the fine folks at Money's Worth Stores in Summerside, Prince Edward Island, Moncton, New Brunswick, and Amherst, Nova Scotia. They're locally owned and operated. Come talk to their knowledgeable professional staff for all your home renovation needs. Also, Island Crafts and Candles, quality homemade products made locally in Summerside, Prince Edward Island, and Little Buddy Puzzles, locally made puzzles featuring images from local artists and photographers. And of course, all the contact information for the above mentioned always available on our Facebook group page called PEI/Maritime Paranormal Chat. Hi, welcome back to Maritime Paranormal Chat. My name is Raven, and my story takes place on a hot, humid Friday night in August 2019 in the outskirts of a small town in New Brunswick, Canada called Quispamsis. It was approximately 11 p.m., and feeling the moisture in the air from a distant thunder shower, I could tell that sleep wasn't going to come easy this night. I had just finished my evening ritual of trying to get my eyes tired enough to sleep by playing games on my phone. The lights in my room were turned off at this point. My bedroom window was open, approximately 6 inches, and I could feel the warm, damp breeze envelop me as I set my phone down next to me so I could make my first attempt at falling asleep. Still wide awake, I heard a soft, distant clap of thunder, followed by the faint, subtle glow of lightning in the distance. Being a lover of nature in all its glory, I sat up and slowly made my way to the window in the darkness. As I readied my phone to take a video of the next display of lightning, I could hear the thunder and waited, but to no avail, as I could see that the potential thunder shower and light show was actually moving away from my location, and it was already too far off to get any clear, worthwhile images of lightning. So, still sitting in the darkness, I turned off the camera on my phone as I was starting to feel tired enough to go to sleep. I was just about to leave my perch at the window when I first seen it. But first, it's important to get a sense of the geographical layout of the area. The location of where this incident took place, although residential, is still a very heavily forested area. The place where I was staying was on the outskirts of town with houses on each side of the one and only street. The houses were well spaced apart, and on each side of the road, beyond the houses, was nothing but thick forest for as far as the eye could see. Looking out into the backyard on a star-filled night, you can clearly see the silhouette of the tree line across the yard approximately 60 feet away, while on a cloudy night, it's almost pitch black. On this particular night, the clouds were starting to clear and the silhouette of the tree line was becoming more visible. So, as I grew more tired and sleepy, I thought I was seeing things when I first noticed what looked like a small bluish-white ball of light, about the size of your palm, that flashed on briefly and then off at the very top of what had to be about a 20 to 30 foot tall pine tree. After just looking at my phone and turning it off, I just chalked what I was seeing up to an after image from the light on my phone, and then quite casually crawled into bed and fell asleep, not giving it a second thought. Fast forward to the next night, after going through the same routine of playing a couple of games on my phone, again trying to get my eyes tired so I could make my first attempt at going to sleep on this night, once again I realized that I wasn't anywhere near tired enough to sleep. So I decided to see if there was any lightning activity outside in the distance, or maybe I could catch a glimpse of a shooting star, as it was a very clear and star-filled night, and this night, the moon was even out, and in full force. I still wasn't thinking anything about what I had seen the night before, because I had already dismissed it as my eyes playing tricks on me. After pulling the window open, approximately 6 inches again, to let some air in, I sat there in my perch with my head between the window and the white pull-down blind behind my back. I started scanning the skies for anything worthy of filming or taking a picture of. After sitting there quietly looking for approximately 5 to 10 minutes, I noticed it was exactly the same time as the night before, and then I remembered the previous night and wondered if what I saw then was really an after image, or if it was actually something that was physically out there across the yard at the top of the tree line. Tonight I could clearly see the silhouette of the trees, the yard, the moon reflecting off the open partial swamp area behind the tree line. Anything that had physical form within 100 feet, its silhouette was clearly visible. I was literally a second or two away from turning from the window and going to bed when I noticed the same bluish-white light at the top of the same tree flash on for approximately 2 seconds, and then off for 2 seconds. Then it would flash on again for the same amount of time, this time about a quarter of the way down the tree, and then off again, then on again halfway down the tree, and off again. The light was always going on and off, and always for the exact same amount of time. Its movement seemed very controlled, smooth, and steady,
unlike that of a firefly, whose movements typically have that bumbling, almost bouncy, fluttering motion. As this thing made its way to the bottom of the tree, I tried to activate the camera on my phone as inconspicuously as I could so I could get some video footage of what I was seeing. But every time I tried to turn on my phone, the light from the screen would illuminate my face and the white blind behind my back, thus giving away my position. So I turned it off in case there was somebody out in the yard or some other unknown intelligence. I didn't want to blow my cover. By this time, the light was on the ground, continuously flashing on and off for the same amount of time, always. Almost like it was doing a grid pattern search. I watched in amazement, intense curiosity, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't scared, because I was, as I had no idea what I was looking at. You could make out the shape of everything in eyesight that had solid form this night, and nothing was moving that could have been the cause of projecting this light. I watched this light go all over the lawn, in behind the tree line where there was large opening of maybe half a football field, which consisted of partial field and large swamp areas. This light effortlessly traveled over the large water patches and field without making so much as a single sound. Then it would come back to our lawn. Then it would go to the left on the lawn, out of my field of vision, only to return again a couple of seconds later, crossing our lawn and this time disappearing to the right. I watched and listened intensely for any sound or hint of movement other than the soft, cool breeze of the night air. There were never any footsteps, no whispering, no grass being walked through, nothing. I waited for approximately 20 to 30 seconds for it to come back into my field of vision, but it never did. It was then that I went to the other end of the house on the right-hand side to see if I could see anything from there, but there was nothing. Then I looked out the window in the front of the house to see if maybe it went out there, but again, there was nothing. Upon returning to my room, I looked out the window one more time and waited for another 5 to 10 minutes, but there was still no sign of it returning. That's when I decided that it was time to go to sleep, because whatever it was obviously wasn't coming back anytime soon, if at all. I wish that I could say I was brave enough to go outside that night when it was only a few feet away from my window to see firsthand what it was, but fear got the best of me as I had no idea who or what it was that I was looking at. Had somebody else been awake at the time I seen it, I'm sure we both would have gone out to see what it was, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. The next morning, I shared my encounter with the residents of the house I was staying at, and nobody seemed to care or give it a second thought. I've shared this story with a lot of people since then, and nobody's come up with a plausible explanation as to what it was that I was looking at that night. Some people suggested that it may have been a drone, but drones make noise, and surely I would have seen some sort of movement somewhere at some point of a physical object. Also, if it were a drone, why would the light appear in the exact same spot, in the exact same tree, at the exact same time 2 nights in a row? And hypothetically speaking, if it was a drone, and it was up high enough that I couldn't hear the engine, and it was shining a light down on the ground from any significant height, how could the light remain so bright? As I mentioned before, this light was a bright bluish-white light about the size of your palm. The best way I can describe the intensity is to liken it to somebody standing 30 feet away with a bright, small flashlight, not a pen light, but a mini flashlight, shining it directly towards you in your face. That's how intense the light looked. It wasn't bright enough to light up the yard or anything like that, but definitely bright for its size. The brightness of the light definitely wasn't from anything glowing. Other people insist that it was a firefly, but fireflies don't come in shades of blue, at least not around here. Besides, the movement was too smooth and too controlled to be from a bug. And I've yet to see a firefly with that bright of a glow. If anybody has any suggestions or ideas as to what this could have been that I seen that night, please feel free to share, as I've been scratching my head over this ever since.
Don't go away, we'll be back with more Maritime Paranormal Chat. But first, for those of you who aren't familiar, there's a lot of interest in the Missing 411 book and video series by David Paulides, which basically deals with strange disappearances that occur all over the world, but mostly in the U.S. national parks, more specifically the Yosemite National Park. These are actual cases of ordinary people who've disappeared under extremely unusual circumstances, in most cases never to be seen again. The small number of those that are found are usually deceased, too young, or too disoriented to make any coherent account of what happened. There's a lot of videos on YouTube that address this, and if you're interested in purchasing any of the Missing 411 books or videos, you can go to the website www.canammissing.com. That's C-A-N for Nancy, A, M for Mary, M for Mary, ISSING.com. Taking us up to our first story, here's the trailer for one of the 3 videos he has out in total so far. It's called Missing, The Hunted. The other 2 are called Vanished and Missing 411. To see the complete trailer with video attached, just search it on YouTube. Right now, here we go. We'll be back.
Mysterious disappearances.
Tom, you around?
When missing, simply vanished.
Generally speaking, hunters are very experienced and knowledgeable outdoorsmen. And so when one vanishes, you know something unusual has occurred.
As a hunter, you're like, I'm fine, I'm armed, I'm safe. There's no reason for why these people go missing.
They never found anything. Not the walkie-talkie, not his gun, nothing.
Obviously, an animal didn't get to it because there'd be a big scatter. Bees to find.
The FBI doesn't investigate missing adults. So then why would the FBI arrive on Tom Messick's case?
When you see hundreds of victims scattered throughout our national forests and national parks, you have to question the reality of it.
So he could have made fire. He had a gun, he could have signaled help. What happened to him?
I like to know, but I don't think we ever will.
Whatever it is big, and we started recording them.
Frequencies go way above and way below the abilities of humans.
I look and I'm thinking, what is this thing in the trees? It went from like tree to tree, and then it disappeared.
Is it possible for an 82-year-old man to simply vanish while sitting alone in the woods? Can a man with severe hypothermia hike 6 miles through snow with no shoes? This is one of those recurring phenomena. It's going to happen again. It's just a matter of time.
None of it makes any sense.
You're listening to Maritime Paranormal Chat, where we discuss the paranormal, the unexplained, creepy things, or anything just plain weird. My name is Raven, and thank you very much for joining us today. Standing by is our very own creepy Laroo with weird news. But first, somebody sent me a link this week about an interesting article about the first ever empirical study on creepiness. Now, the study was carried out by a team at Knox College in Illinois who asked more than 1,300 people to complete the online survey. Unsurprisingly, males were seen as more physically threatening to people of both sexes, thus more likely to be seen as creepy. The report also found that our creepiness detector is activated when our brain is trying to work out whether someone has ill intentions, as we're placed on our guard by people who physically touch us inappropriately or in a threatening manner, or people who exhibit non-normal and non-verbal behavior. Also, those who may have occupations that reflect a fascination with death, unusual sexual behavior, or anything out of the norms of society also ranked among the creepiest. According to the research, working odd hours can also contribute to this, which perhaps explains why taxi drivers appeared on the list. They also asked what hobbies people perceived as creepy, and collecting things came out on top. And someone who collects dolls, insects, reptiles, or body parts such as teeth, bones, or fingernails was considered especially creepy, and rightfully so. Now, believe it or not, hobbies that involved watching, such as bird watching, was also ranked as really creepy by many, while members of the clergy also made the list. The team concluded that everything we found in this study is consistent with the notion that the perception of creepiness is a direct response to the possibility of threat. Now, what do you think the creepiest job you could possibly have would be? Well, according to the survey, as I mentioned earlier, that was one of the questions asked, and their top 10 list of the creepiest jobs included: number 10 was a writer, number 9, security guard, 8 was a garbage collector, 7, janitor, 6, clergyman, 5, taxi driver, 4, funeral director, or whoever does the embalming, Sex shop owner was number 3, number 2 was taxidermist, and number 1 was a clown. Now, maybe I watched too many movies, but I could think of a lot more professions that were even creepier, so I conducted my own independent survey asking 20 people I knew what they thought would be the most creepiest jobs they could think of. My list consists of the following, and these are in no particular order. How about a coroner or a morgue attendant? Forensic entomologist. They study the rate of decomposition of a corpse in regards to insect activity feeding on it. How about a crime scene cleaner going up and cleaning up after a murder? Or crime scene investigator? Police diver, diving into the murky swamps and lakes in search of bodies and or murder weapons. Or a miner, if you're claustrophobic, that could cause some real problems. A cryonics technician. Cryonics, of course, is the study of preserving a dead body, especially the head, in the hopes of being able to bring it back to life someday. Or how about a body farm owner/operator? A lot of times when people donate their bodies to science, their bodies actually end up at these body farms, where the bodies are placed in different parts of the farm in various degrees of decomposition under different environmental conditions. Now, the goal is for training law enforcement so they can determine how long a body has been dead for once they're found. Or how about a paranormal investigator, a gravedigger, or an ambulance driver? I don't know about you, but I don't think you could pay me enough money to do any of those jobs. Getting back to the survey, apparently further studies are planned on this topic, as the researchers say. They believe that the research is a good first step in looking at a topic that no one's been actually studying before. And they said they see nothing in their data to discourage them from pursuing the idea that creepiness is an adaptive human response to the possibility of threat from others. They also want to extend this line of research in future studies by looking at responses to creepy places like haunted houses, as well as to creepy people, to determine if our creepiness detectors are attuned specifically to social interactions or if they actually function in response to the possibility of threats in general. We'll definitely keep you posted as results of further research on this topic become available. Now, standing by is our very own creepy Laroo, Canada's favorite hunchback, to let us know what's going on in the world of the paranormal, the odd, or the just plain weird. Creepy, over to you.
You're listening to Maritime Paranormal Chat, and now it's time for the weird news. A look at what's new in the world of the paranormal, the weird, or just plain creepy. I'm Creepy Laroo. Right now I'm going to share a story that I found online, which was kind of weird, but at the same time kind of heartwarming. This is for all you animal lovers out there. And ladies, I don't just mean your hairy boyfriends. No, sorry, I lost myself there. When the volunteers at an animal rescue center in Missouri discovered a tiny brown puppy in the freezing cold in early November, he had an extra special gift. The dog had a little brown tail growing out of his forehead, right between his eyes. Now, other than the beginnings of frostbite on one paw, the 10-week-old puppy was healthy and happy, according to Mac's Mission, a non-profit organization that focuses on rescuing special needs dogs. They named the dog Narwhal after the marine mammal, but unlike the narwhal unicorn of the sea, which has a horn that's actually a long, straight canine front tooth growing out of its forehead, this puppy's extra tail is soft and short and only flops around when he plays. He has another real tail located right where it's supposed to be, which wags furiously when he's happy. And according to the team, that's all the time. Narwhal's x-ray showed no bones in the tail on his forehead, nor did it show any reason to have the extra tail removed. When the rescuers posted his story on Facebook, the million-dollar question on everybody's lips was, does the extra tail wag? Apparently, the extra tail is not connected to anything other than tissue and has no real other use other than making him extremely unique. Now, the team says the face tail does not bother the dog in any way, and he never slows down just like any normal puppy. Although he seems healthy, the rescue team said they wanted to keep an eye on the dog to make sure his tail doesn't become a further issue. As they pointed out, sometimes there are other genetic factors in cases like these so they're being super cautious as they want to ensure the dog has everything he needs and his good health stays intact. People all over the country reached out to the rescue team offering to give the unique puppy a home. Although he received more than 300 adoption requests, Narwhal is going to stay right with the team, at least for now. Max Mission's founder Rochelle Steffen says that trying to sift through all those applications and making sure the adopters had the best intentions for the high-profile dog was difficult. The whole rescue team cannot imagine him leaving, she said, as we all fell in love with him. If somebody's going to make money off the dog, I'd like to see it going toward the rescue mission effort and save thousands more. Now, the playful pup has certainly been popular with fans as thousands of followers have shared, liked, and gushed over his videos, and even donated to the rescue in his honor. Now, the rescue team's Facebook post goes on to say that right now, he's pretty much the most unique, amazing example of what we do here, and we're so thankful to have the chance to be part of his journey. He's so popular, they should be calling him a hot dog. Sorry, I lost myself again. In other news, a family in Oregon was treated to a delightful but unusual surprise this week when their cat gave birth. On Wednesday morning, Kyla King was checking on her expectant cat on her farm east of Albany when she noticed the kittens had already been born. One hiding behind its mom, believe it or not, had 2 heads. Well, at least 2 faces anyway. Kyla took a snapshot of the special kitten, sending it to her husband BJ with a text that read, "We now have 6 1/3 kittens now." The kitten, which they've aptly named Biscuits and Gravy, has 2 mouths, 2 noses, and 4 eyes. 2 complete faces on one tiny body. It's believed the kitten has a birth defect known as diprosopus or craniofacial duplication, which is a rare condition that causes the duplication of heads. Cats with this defect are often called Janus cats, after a Roman god with 2 faces. According to National Geographic magazine, Janus cats have an excess of a protein called sonic hedgehog, which influences how facial features develop. King said Biscuit was rejected by the mother cat, so she's been hand-rearing and feeding the kitten until a full veterinarian exam can be conducted to determine whether Biscuit is healthy enough to survive. Many people offered a high price to take the 2-headed kitten home, but the king said they've become too attached. Many Janus cats don't live very long, but many have been known to survive for years if their internal organs aren't dramatically altered by their condition. The Kings are dedicated to letting Biscuits and Gravy enjoy its life as long as possible. The oldest known Janus cat, which has since died at age 15, was Frank and Louie of Massachusetts, who was also featured in the Guinness Book of World Records. The Facebook post has received more than 1,700 positive reactions so far. Now, the creepiest thing about this condition of craniofacial duplication is that it's not restricted to just animals. For example, during a routine scan of a human baby in its 3rd trimester of pregnancy, doctors at the Medical University of South Carolina detected an unusual mass to the right of the baby's mouth. Once the baby girl was born, it became apparent the mass was actually a small second mouth. It had its own lips, oral cavity, teeth, and a tiny little tongue that moved in perfect synchronicity with her main tongue as she fed. Luckily for this baby girl, the extra oral cavity did not appear to cause any problems with her breathing or ability to feed. It didn't even connect to her central mouth, which appeared to function normally. As in the previous story, the baby was born with the condition diprosopus, or the duplication of head and or facial structures, a very rare condition in humans, with only 35 cases on record since 1900. At its extreme, again like the cat in the previous example, this condition can lead to a complete facial duplication, but most times it only involves just one area of the face, typically the mouth. And for some reason, the condition occurs more often in females, but no one knows why. Diprosopus usually occurs as part of a syndrome and is often associated with other conditions, like a cleft lip and cleft palate. This patient's condition is an exceptionally rare case because there were no associated syndromes or abnormalities, thus allowing doctors to perform surgery to remove the extra mouth when the girl was just 6 months old. In total, they removed some muscle, bone, mouth, mucous membrane, and esophagus tissue, as well as a salivary gland and 6 unerupted teeth, all while carefully trying to preserve her facial nerves. Other than some swelling at the surgical site, which resolved after several months, the patient healed well and required no further treatment. The doctors noted she has a little trouble relaxing the right part of her lower lip, possibly due to some missing nerves. Now, on the creepier side of the news, a new owner of a pub believes that her establishment is haunted and apparently has closed-circuit TV footage to prove it. She claims that glasses actually fly off the tables, chairs move on their own, and darts throw themselves. Kelly Headley, owner of the Black Bull in a place called Leeds in the UK, recently purchased the pub, and she says that she's convinced that it is haunted, so much so that she's already had some real-life Ghostbusters in to investigate. Paranormal researchers called Ghost Watchers UK recently visited the pub in the hopes of spotting something supernatural, and although they didn't actually see anything, they say they heard something really strange and creepy. One member of the group, Phil Riley, said, "When Kelly had gone to bed for the night, as she lives upstairs in the building, we were in the basement investigating when we heard a banging coming from upstairs in the bar, and then we heard some scraping. When we came back upstairs, the stools had moved, yet no one had been in the room." Kelly now wants to know whether or not her pub is genuinely haunted. As she explained, "When I first arrived here, I knew nothing of the pub's reputation of being haunted. Then someone randomly asked me, 'Has anything happened yet?' It's then I asked what they meant, and they told me that this is one of the most haunted pubs in the Northeast. Since becoming more aware of this," she says, "a lot has been going on. Even my cats are on edge. The darts throw themselves at the board, my lights flash off and on all the time. I've heard furniture moving when nobody else has been in the room. One night we had a big group in, and they all stopped to watch in horror as a glass moved across the bar and then smashed on the floor. Apparently there's a spare room in the pub that Kelly or anyone else who works there won't dare go in. She explained, "There's just something about it. I don't know what it is. It just doesn't feel right. It's been cleaned many times, yet it still has this horrible smell, and you get a feeling of heaviness when you walk in. You don't feel right, even if the door is open." You can Google this story if you want to see the video footage from the CCTV that I mentioned earlier, as it does show a chair moving by itself. Now for me, I'm a little more skeptical of videos that show furniture or inanimate objects moving on their own, as there's just too much room for manipulation. But if you want to see it, just do a search on Phantom Barstool Moves by Itself. Now, also in England recently, someone else was given the fright of a lifetime after a ghostly apparition appeared in a photo behind her 2 children in a park. Laura Watson from Newcastle took the picture of her son Byron, daughter Charlotte, and their cousin Jack on a trip to Plessy Woods Park before noticing what appeared to be a small child over his shoulder in the image. She's now so freaked out by the image that she claims it stopped her from being able to sleep at night. She says it's very unusual, and everyone is really freaked out. "Me and my daughter couldn't go to sleep that night because we were so scared, and that's still the case. My husband was on night shifts at the time, and I was all alone. I was terrified in case anything had followed us back. I didn't believe in anything like that until I saw this for myself." Laura says she was enjoying the weather in the park with her family and their dogs when she decided to take the picture of the kids playing next to a tree. She says, "There was no one behind the tree, as my daughter or nephew surely would have seen them. There was no one there, only us. It's very, very creepy." She goes on to say that when she got home, she uploaded the picture on the computer, and that's when she first seen it. And then she zoomed in, and she was able to see it closer, explaining, "It looked like a child to me. I don't know if it's a girl or a boy, but you can clearly see a face, and it looks like the hand is on my son's shoulder, which is very, very creepy." Some people have accused her of photoshopping the picture as they can't believe that it's real, but Laura argues that she doesn't have a clue how to do anything like that. Some people have suggested the image could be the spirit of a boy who died in the woods years ago. But Laura says she doesn't know much about the history of the woods, but some people are saying that many moons ago, a young boy drowned in the river. You don't know if it's true or just a rumor. People even asked if maybe she had a brother that died when he was just young, a twin maybe, but he had nothing like that. She says there hadn't been any kids die in her family, so it couldn't be anyone she knew. She goes on to say that it certainly isn't something that I'm familiar with. I've never experienced anything like this in my life, and hope to never again. It was just a normal day, a beautiful hot day, and we were just having fun. If you want to see the actual picture and story, and lose some sleep for yourself, just Google "Mom left terrified" after spotting ghost in the park. Don't go away, because coming up we're going to Amherst, Nova Scotia, as that was the scene of one of Canada's most famous poltergeist hauntings. Also one of my all-time favorites to read about. We'll be back. I'm Creepy Laroo for Maritime Paranormal Chat.
If you are looking for a truly creepy documentary, I highly recommend watching or reading the book for Hunt for the Skinwalker, both book and DVD available now at Amazon.ca and Amazon.com. For more than 50 years, the bizarre events at this remote Utah ranch have ranged from the perplexing to the wholly terrifying. Vanishing and mutilated cattle, unidentified flying objects, poltergeist activity, the appearance of huge otherworldly creatures. We'll get more in depth with this topic in a later episode, but for now, here's the trailer, and don't forget to check it out with video in its entirety on YouTube. Here we go.
The global public is not ready to have global confirmation of this. A lot of disturbing things will occur. It's just too powerful.
Skinwalker Ranch. This is like the Area 51 of the paranormal.
It was not a single phenomenon. There were a host of things that happened.
Have there been experiences there that have shaken the Pentagon and CIA and other agencies? Absolutely.
Nobody knows what we're dealing with. That's the bottom line. Nobody knows.
This is 30 or 40 hours of material that the public has never seen before.
They saw this humanoid creature crawling through this tunnel, hovering 4 feet above the ground.
Something forced 4 2,000-pound bulls to cram themselves into this trailer without opening this door. It's completely impossible.
I've seen things that I can't explain.
This was one of the most surprising things that we recorded right after I purchased the ranch.
Is it real?
Oh, yes, I believe it is.
Something is here.
These are real, tangible, physical events. This is game-changing.
It's one thing to be reading about UFOs or other realities or interdimensionals. It's another thing to be staring at it right in the face.
Oh, God.
Amherst, Nova Scotia is a small, quiet town on the east coast of Canada. It's just a 2-hour drive by car from Halifax, 40 minutes from Moncton, New Brunswick, and approximately 1 hour from Confederation Bridge, which links Prince Edward Island to the mainland. Not much happens in this sleepy town, but that wasn't always the case, as over 100 years ago, in 1878, the events that took place in an otherwise quiet, unassuming small cottage-style house located on Princess Street in that town would make national headlines and would come to be known as the Great Amherst Mystery, a story that is now often referred to as Canada's most famous poltergeist. Our story centers around 14-year-old Esther Cox, who at the time lived in the relatively small house with her family, which consisted of the head of the household, Olive, which was Esther's oldest sister, Olive's husband, Daniel Teed, who owned the house, Olive and Dan's 2 young boys, Willie and George, aged 5 and 1 respectively, and Dan's brother John, Esther and Olive's brother William, and Esther's other older sister Jane. Esther was generally described as a strange, often moody, but good girl, and has always had a good reputation, in every sense of the word. But the events that would take place in 1878 to 1879 made some people not so sure. It all started on the eve of September 4th, 1878, when Esther and her sister Jane, who shared a bedroom and a bed, were just settling down for the night when Jane felt what she thought was a mouse crawling inside her mattress. Frightened, the girls lit the kerosene lamp and searched for the mouse, but to no avail. Later that same night, the sisters heard rustling sounds coming from under the bed and decided that it was coming from a cardboard box that they'd been using to store pieces of patchwork. When they took the box out and set it in the middle of the room for further examination, before they had a chance to open it, to their dismay and horror, the box jumped about a foot in the air as if lifted and thrown by unseen hands, thus landing on its side. The girls screamed for Dan, the owner of the house, who came to their rescue, and upon hearing their incredible story, only laughed and remarked that they must have been dreaming or playing around, and then casually pushed the box back under the bed, shaking his head and smiling as he headed back to his own room. Fast forward to the following night, Esther, who had gone to bed early because of a fever, would wake from her sleep in the middle of the night and cried, "Wake up, Jane, I'm dying." Jane woke up, lit the lamp, and to her horror found that her sister's face was blood red, her eyes bulging in terror as she trembled in her nightgown. Jane called for assistance and was soon joined by Dan and Olive, her brother William, and Dan's brother John. Not knowing what else to do, Olive helped her younger sister get back into bed, whereupon all the color drained from Esther's face. Esther's hands and feet were alarmingly swollen at this point. Her complexion now was deathly pale, where moments earlier it had been beet red, and her skin was burning with fever, where moments ago it, earlier, had been icy cold. While Esther's body was steadily swelling as she writhed in pain on the bed, a tremendous sound like a clap of thunder could be heard in the room. Shortly thereafter, 3 loud cracks sounded beneath the bed, and Esther suddenly went completely limp, her appearance having returned to normal. When they satisfied themselves that Esther was not dead but somehow spontaneously fallen asleep, her bewildered family members eventually returned to their own beds. The following morning, Esther seemed reasonably well, although her appetite was greatly diminished. Her family members, being unable to explain the bizarre incident the previous night, decided to keep the matter to themselves. 4 nights later, Esther had a similar attack. This time, all the bedsheets flew off of her and her sister and landed in a corner in the room, as if they'd been ripped off by invisible hands. Jane, who had been awake to witness the spectacle, actually fainted from fright. Hearing Esther's screams, Olive, Dan, William, and John once again rushed into the bedroom. Seeing the bedsheets lying in the corner of the room, Olive gathered them together and placed them over her ailing sisters. Almost immediately, the sheets flew back into the corner of the room in the same manner as before. Before anyone had time to react, the pillow upon which Esther's head lay hurtled through the air and struck John Teed square in the face. Not knowing what else to do, all the family members, aside from John, who fled the room in fear at this point, sat on the edge of the bed in order to keep the sheets from flying off again. After a succession of incredibly loud knocks, seemingly coming from beneath the bed again, Esther's swelling subsided, and she fell into a peaceful sleep. The following day, the family decided to call the local doctor. When Dan Teed informed the physician of what had transpired the night before, the doctor laughed and assured him that no such nonsense would occur while he stayed in the house, which he intended to do just that night until 1 o'clock in the morning. The doctor arrived at the Teed house at 10 p.m. He immediately examined Esther, who had already been in bed for an hour, and deduced that she'd suffered a tremendous shock or trauma of some kind. As he spoke, Esther's pillow moved laterally until only one corner was tucked beneath the girl's head. The doctor watched in amazement as the pillow returned to its former position without any external assistance. "Did anybody else see that?" the doctor exclaimed. "It went right back again." "So it did," replied John Teed, who was also in the room. "But if it moves out again, it won't go back, because I intend to hold on to it, even if it did bang me over the head last night." No sooner had he said this than the pillow moved laterally again, as if to challenge John. Though John gripped it with all his might, the pillow subsequently slid back under Esther's head, as if it had encountered no resistance at all. John's hair stood on end. Shortly after that, several more loud knocks could be heard from beneath the bed. Although the doctor examined the area from which the sounds had originated, he was unable to pinpoint the source. He proceeded to walk about the room, and the knocking would follow him, sounding from the floor beneath him. After about a minute of knocking, the bed sheets once again flew into the corner of the room. Immediately a scratching sound would be heard emanating from the wall behind the bed. When everyone in the room looked to see the source of the noise, they saw that a disturbing message had been carved into the wall. The message simply said, "Esther Cox, you were mine to kill." For 3 weeks, the strange activity increased in both frequency and intensity. Esther's invisible tormentor pelted her with objects like potatoes and wooden planks, often in the presence of her family, and made violent banging noises all throughout the house. The doctor, who prescribed morphine to Esther in order to calm her shattered nerves, went outside during one of these banging sessions and noted that from the street it sounded as if somebody was standing on the cottage roof and pounding on the shingles with a sledgehammer. Shortly after this incident, Jane observed that the mysterious knocking often seemed to correspond with things that they said, as if the invisible presence that made the sounds could hear and understand them. Dan decided to test this theory and asked the mysterious force to knock once for every person in the room. Sure enough, the entity responded with the correct number of raps, each of which were violent enough to shake the entire house. Over the next 3 weeks, the family developed a method by which to communicate with the mysterious entity, which harassed them at random by now. In response to their closed-ended questions, the presence would knock once for a negative answer, 3 times for an answer in the affirmative, and give 2 knocks when in doubt about a reply. All throughout October, the Teed house was visited by several clergymen of different denominations who had heard of the strange activity and hoped to see it with their own eyes. A well-educated Baptist minister came away from the house convinced that neither Esther nor her family members were responsible for the manifestations. Another man of the cloth, this one a Methodist preacher, witnessed a number of manifestations at the Teed home. The most startling of these involved cold water in a bucket, which, while standing in the kitchen table, began to bubble and froth as if it were boiling. By the end of the month, folks were flocking to the Teed home by the dozens from all over the Maritimes, eager to witness the manifestations. Some came away believing the whole thing to be a hoax, while others thought that Esther was somehow hypnotizing people in order to make them see and hear what she wanted them to. Most, however, left with the unsettling conviction that the manifestations were genuine. The manifestations continued with casual frequency until December, whereupon Esther Cox contracted diphtheria. Now, during the 2 weeks it took for her to recover from her illness, the manifestations ceased entirely. Upon her recovery, Esther made a trip to Sackville, New Brunswick to visit another one of her sisters who was married. During the 2 weeks she spent in Sackville, neither her sister's house nor the Teed home experienced any strange activity. Upon Esther's return to the Teed cottage, she and Jane began sleeping in a different room, hoping that this might put a stop to the affair. Instead, the activity got worse than ever before. In addition to producing loud noises and hurling objects around the house, the entity began dropping lit matches from the ceiling of Esther and Jane's bedroom at night, a phenomenon which all the family members witnessed. On one occasion, while Dan, Olive, Jane, and Esther were in attendance, one of Esther's dresses, which had been hanging from a nail on the door, rolled up by itself, traveled underneath the bed, and burst into flames. On another occasion, while Olive and Esther were alone in the house making butter, a fire started in the cellar. Unable to distinguish the inferno themselves, the women went out into the street, frantically calling for help. A stranger, whom they've never seen before, ran to their rescue and smothered the fire with a mat from the dining room. Without waiting to be thanked, the man walked out the door, up the street, and was never seen again. In the ensuing weeks, the ghost began to speak to Esther, although only she could hear it. Then one cold winter night, while the family was lounging in the parlor, Esther suddenly rose to her feet, a look of horror on her face, and pointed with a trembling hand to a corner of the room. "Look there," she croaked. "Look there. Can't you see it? My God, it's the ghost. Don't you all see him?" The other family members did not. The ghost proceeded to speak to Esther, telling her that it would burn the house down unless she left that very night. Although none of the other family members could hear or see the ghost, Dan T. did not want to take any chances and asked the neighbor, who had expressed a great interest in the manifestations, if he and his wife would take in his misfortunate sister-in-law. The couple agreed, and Esther moved into the neighbor's home that night. Several weeks went by without incident. It seemed that Esther had finally ditched her invisible tormentor, but then one day, while she was scrubbing the floor in her new home, the brush she was using disappeared right out of her hand. She told the lady of the house what had happened, and she, the matron, and the lady's daughter subsequently searched for the brush, all in vain. As soon as they decided to abandon the search, the brush fell from the ceiling, grazing Esther's head. Discounting this incident, 6 weeks went by without any major mischief. Then mysterious fires would begin to appear in the house, and the man of the house, not willing to run the risk of having his house incinerated, asked Esther to spend her days in the bar that he owned. Esther's unseen tormentor apparently followed her to this new location, and all manner of incredible manifestations soon began to take place in the bar, much to the amazement of the patrons. In one of the more notable of these incidents, a small pocket knife belonging to the neighbor's son drove itself into Esther's back. When the knife was removed and returned to the boy, it was ripped out of the boy's hand and flew through the air again, inserting itself exactly in the same wound. After a peaceful 8-week stay with a family who lived in the Nova Scotia countryside, Esther returned to Amherst. The manifestations resumed immediately, as powerful as ever. At this point, an enterprising American actor named Walter Hubble, who had just finished a theatrical tour in Newfoundland, moved in with the Teed family as a paying boarder in the hopes of documenting the manifestations. Over the course of 6 weeks, Hubble was pelted with inanimate objects, saw household items vanish and reappear as if dropped from the ceiling, watched objects levitate and translocate, and witnessed several fires break out spontaneously. All the antics had an air of mischief, as if the poltergeists were doing their best to annoy the guest and the family. Hubble would note that the ghosts refrained from their devilry on Sundays. Convinced that Esther was incapable of conducting the pranks herself, Hubble began to converse with the poltergeists using the same technique the Teeds had already developed. The ghosts accurately told him the time on his watch and guessed how many coins he had in his pocket. Hubble then asked the spirits the following questions, which they answered with knocks. One question, have you all lived on Earth? Yes, was the answer. Question 2, have you seen God? The answer was no. Third question, are you in heaven? The answer was no. Fourth question, are you in hell? The answer was yes. Fifth question, have you seen the devil? And an emphatic yes could be heard through knocks. On June 28, 1878, the Teed house resounded to the sound of a trumpet. The strident noise continued throughout the day until in the evening a small silver trumpet would fall from the ceiling into one of the rooms. Neither Hubble nor any members of the Teed family had any idea where the trumpet came from, and although Hubble later declared his intention to donate the instrument to a museum, the fate of this object remains a mystery to this day. The manifestations increased in scope and intensity until that summer it was decided that Esther Cox had to leave the Teed home for everyone's safety's sake. After embarking on a brief speaking tour with Walter Hubble, during which she was heckled by audience members who believed her to be a fraud, Esther Cox went to live in the home of a friend of the Teed family. Shortly after her arrival, the family's barn burned down and Esther was accused of arson. She was subsequently sentenced to 4 months in prison, but was released after 1 month on account of good behavior. After her release, Esther married a man who had come to visit her during her imprisonment, and following her marriage, the poltergeist activity would stop for good. Esther Cox would ultimately marry twice, having a son by each of her husbands. She eventually moved to Brockton, Massachusetts with her second husband and died on November 8, 1912. She was only 52. Walter Hubble would go on to write a book about the haunted events that happened in the Teed home. His book was called The Great Amherst Mystery and was published in 1879 and proved to be quite popular, selling at least 55,000 copies, which was quite a feat for that time. His book would also become the primary, most accepted, and documented account of the series of events surrounding Esther Cox, and is often referred to as factual. The Amherst case was also investigated by the British paranormal researcher Hereward Carrington, who took statements from surviving witnesses of the events in 1907 and eventually published them along with a detailed account of the case in 1913. Other researchers looked at the case more critically than Carrington. In particular, in 1919, Dr. Walter F. Prince, proceeding for the American Society for Physical Research, made a detailed case for trickery by Esther Cox while in a dissociative state. Nothing was ever definitively concluded either way in any of the investigations of the mysterious events surrounding Esther Cox that took place on 6 Princess Street way back in 1878. The mystery continues to this very day.
Well, that just about concludes episode 1 of Maritime Paranormal Chat, as we are out of time. Sorry we didn't get a chance to cover the dolls today, but we'll definitely get to that next episode. We're going to sign out right now with some ending music to one of my all-time favorite shows growing up. See if you can guess what it is. I'll tell you what it was next episode. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and we'll scare you later. Have a good one.
The castle lights are growing dim. There's no one left but me and him. When next we meet in Frankenstone, don't come alone.